So the name of the talk is Get to Done Faster. That was part of the conversation today. And I really liked how he talked about the time increments and how long it's going to take you. That can apply to web debugging as well, right? If you think something's going to take you a day, it could take you hours, it could take you weeks if you're not prepared. So what I want to do today is help you figure out a plan to make your apps more resilient and understand network debugging doesn't have to be a tedious process. There are alternative methods and approaches, and if you have the right workflow, this can be something that isn't going to weigh you down. So let's set the stage. I'm a big fan of visualization, right? You're at work, everything's going as planned, you're chugging through Jira like crazy. All of a sudden, you're starting to hear rumblings about network errors, pesky 404s, server errors, and these things start to pile up. And you're like, wow, okay, what do I do? What you decide right now is really going to determine the trajectory of your day. The approach you take, the things that you decide to do to tackle the issue is greatly going to influence what your day looks like. So let's walk you through that. So here's some real world stats, right? We're talking about 1,500 hours annually on debugging. So if we go back to the whole code addiction, it takes 30% longer to debug than to write a single line of code. Now, I'm going to guess for most of you, debugging is not your passion, right? There are other things you'd rather be doing, but it is an important part of your job. And we don't want it to consume your workday because there's other things you want to work on, whether it be coding, working on business logic. But we want to show you how you can remove some of these barriers that are typically associated with debugging. And here are some of the things where we're dealing with, right? Programming languages. I think even Billy said it today, after 15 months, there's always a new language, new framework, something you need to keep up on. What about all those vulnerabilities, right? Every time you turn on the news or checking out your latest tech website, there's some malware issue or some security breach. So you need to be able to ready yourself for these, as well as coding errors. It happens. Even for the best coders, errors are inevitable. But how you choose to overcome them and how you choose to handle them as they arise really determines your success. So when we talk about web debugging, there are quite a lot of things that come to mind for people. But what I'm focusing on today are these specific jobs to be done. So it's going to vary among us, like I said. So if you had to master each of these I've listed here, that's a lot of time. That's a lot of resources. And we all boil down to opportunity cost, right? What is the cost of being able to do all of these well? But with the right tooling, you can do these well without having to invest as much time, but by learning some simple steps. So whether it's diagnosing errors in your API or finding those pesky 404s like we talked about, let's not let things pile up. How do we go ahead and approach this? So as we talk about web debugging, we need a plan. Now, if you followed a lot of my blog posts or other talks I've had, I'm all about mindfulness, living in the moment. Sorry, that does not work when it comes to web debugging. You need to be proactive. You need a better approach. You can't leave any outcomes to chance. So think about this. If we do leave these to chance, there's high costs, whether that be monetary costs, whether that be an app not releasing to market. Those can really hurt your reputation and your success. And that's what we're doing this for, is we like that good feeling of knowing that we have delivered successful outcomes and high quality projects. And if we don't, that puts us in an uncomfortable position. So as we're dealing with these applications becoming more complex, we need a plan, right? How are we going to test our scenarios? How are we going to test our app's resilience? How are we going to get better visibility into the network stack? For any of you that have done some even simple diagnosis of or analysis of live traffic, it can be hundreds and thousands of rows. That can be daunting. So how do you go ahead and focus in on what you need to know that's actually going to matter in your situation? So quick poll, I always like to do this at some of the events, and it was interesting at Kansas City Developer Conference, but how many of you have used a web debugging proxy like in the last 6 months? Okay, well, good. Well, I have a lot to cover for you, and I'm going to walk you through some common scenarios and give you a better idea, because I think people understand the overall concept of web debugging proxy, but maybe as we get a little deeper into it, it's like, wait, how does that work? I get this, but how do they communicate? What does that handshake look like? And that's what I want to cover today. So how does Fiddler work as a web debugging proxy, right? So the basic concept is that man-in-the-middle approach. And what I like to show here is it sits between your server and the client, right? And it performs that handshake. So it acts as a client when talking to the server, and acts as a server is talking with the client. And that's pretty impressive, because what it does, it registers itself with the OS or the system proxy, and it requests that all applications, so like Firefox, Chrome, IE, they begin directing their traffic into Fiddler. And then Fiddler provides you the power to record that traffic, right, when I'll get into the UI a little bit, and look at these HTTP and HTTPS requests, responses, and allows you to create them as well as modify them. So what are some high-level use cases? So you understand how it works as a proxy, but okay, how am I going to use this in my day-to-day job? And that's a valid question. So here I just listed some high-value use cases that you may commonly run into. So it allows you to quickly resolve issues before your customers see them. You can take a look at your internet traffic from your machine, write requests, like I mentioned, to the website, or modify those responses as you see fit. So from the web debugging to mobile, which I'm excited to showcase a mobile demo for you today, these are some of those high-level use cases you can expect. So what are more specific? Okay, so we went into what are those high-level, but tell me more about the features and how I'm going to be able to use those. So we have the composer. That's one of the main features in Fiddler Everywhere, and it's especially useful when you're testing API requests. We also have the inspectors. So if you use the inspectors tab within Fiddler Everywhere, you're able to look into each session, right, with like a single click of one of those lines and get a lot of information about that session request and those details. Rule Builder, and that's the one you'll hear us talking about on some of our Twitch channels, as well as Robert, our influencer, talking about how you can write these rules out of the box. You can mark your sessions. You can test these web changes quickly without even going back to the server, which is pretty impressive. And then you can take steps to reproduce issues. You can even use Fiddler as a reverse proxy. So you can get very creative with it. So you can make Fiddler your own. That's one thing I like to remind people, is that it is a very powerful tool, but you can pick and choose what you need from it. You might not need all the features, but the ones that you do need, they're there for you. So I like this slide too. It talks about when you need to blank, does Fiddler help? And I like being able to say, yes, it does when we do stuff like that. So if you need to report a bug and share with your team for further investigation, when you need to, we talked about replicating the server and security and privacy reviews. We have some big clients who talk about this as an integral part of their process, and it keeps them ahead of the game. And when you have to do performance reviews, and we have another talk after this at 3:20, where it's talking about how Robert uses Fiddler to improve the performance of its app. So handling CSS, minification, things along those lines. So why use it? So you understand the how, you understand what it does, but why? Simple terms, I say, it makes your life easier. You can look at a lot of the feedback that we have, and that's the overarching theme. But how it makes your life easier is going to depend on what your needs are. So if you need to monitor those connection requests, or you need to simulate different sessions, or you need to make sure that your applications are void of bugs, before doing something harmful. Because what we're dealing with sometimes with these bugs are very high consequence scenarios. And that's what we're looking to avoid. We want to deliver those successful outcomes without the hiccups, while being proactive, while being efficient. So it sounds like the best of both worlds, but it is possible. And this is another one that comes up often, is who can use it? I have one developer on my team, or I have a distributive team. Who on my team can use this? And it's really anyone, from developers, engineers, to QAs, and they can work collaboratively together, which is a huge feature as well. So let's say you are on a distributed team and you have someone who is QAing but needs to share something with the developer who could be on a different time zone. They can do that together without having to reproduce all of these issues and duplicate the work. So it really increases your efficiency. So this is one of the new ones. I added this after my talk in Kansas City Developers Conference because people understood the mobile capturing at a high level, but they wanted to see, like, what does that look like in action? So I broke it down to 3 steps, and I'll walk you through it. It's going to vary a little bit depending on Android or iOS. But what it's nice is that when you need to capture that traffic, you can go ahead and go through your settings, and you can manually configure these settings. And by trusting the Fiddler root certificate, it allows Fiddler to act as that man in the middle and capture the HTTPS traffic. And that's one of the big distinctions too, right? We have HTTP, which is the non-secure, HTTPS, which is the secure traffic. And what you're able to do is capture that traffic, and I'm going to use today using the emulators and simulators to really show you how that works. So I'm going to show you right here. Right now I have my Android emulator up, and I also have my iOS simulator, and I have Fiddler everywhere. This is the UI. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and trust that root certificate. I want to make sure that that's ready for me to go. So now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and ensure that my live traffic tab is on, switched on. So then I can go into my settings, and I need to enable that I can capture that mobile traffic. So that's just a quick setting. Okay, now from here I'm going back into my Filter Everywhere, and now I'm going over to my emulator. And I'm going to go to the browser, and you can see here that I have my hash node. And this is a site that I use throughout my presentation as one. So let's first go to an HTTP site. So we'll use example.com. Everyone's familiar with this. You can see I'm not capturing there, right? That traffic is not being loaded on the left-hand side in my live session list. So I need to go into my settings. And within here, I kind of go a little bit deep into my Wi-Fi settings, and I go into the edit up at the top right. And here you see the proxy. And this is where I can do the manual configure proxy. Now for this, since I'm using the emulator, I'm going to use the Android alias IP. If I was on a real device, I would obviously use that IP. So I'm putting that in here, and port, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but Fiddler's port is 8866. So now I go back, I go to my example domain, and I refresh. You can see all of a sudden I'm capturing that HTTP traffic. So I know that now I have that communication set. So the next thing I need to do, and I can see from here as well, is that I'm getting all of the session details. As you see, I'm clicking around the bottom. The next thing I want to do is be able to capture that secure traffic. So if I go back to the secure site of Hashnode, you're going to see it's going to tell me my connection's not private, right? So there's a few extra steps that I need to take to set this up to capture the HTTPS traffic. And this is where the Fiddler root certificate comes in, as well as some of the trusting connections. So we have a certain site, and this is called getFiddler8866, and it is a nice service that allows you to download the certificate as well as install it. And this is right in our documentation within the product, so it makes it easy for you. So I go ahead, you can download the certificate there. So now it's just advised me that I need to go into my settings so I can actually install the certificate. You've downloaded it, now you need to install. So go back into my settings. I'm still in the Android. We'll go to the iOS next. And in the security part is where I'm going to go into the more security settings. And I'm going to go into that credentials, and we see that install a certificate. And I have that CA certificate right there. And I can install this anyway. You'll get that message. It shouldn't deter you. It just is looking out for you, but Fiddler is a trusted. I can install that, and it gives me a success message. So it's not as daunting as you think. I'm going ahead, I'm just showing you if you wanted to look at any other certificates or credentials that you have installed on your device, you can go into the setting. So now I'm going to go back to my HTTPS Hashnode site and see if I have secured that connection. Yep. And then what you can tell over here is you're looking through this live session list, you can see they now start with the HTTPS, which puts us in good shape. And again, that's just showing a little high level of some of the response data that you can see if you were to click around. And we'll get into some of those scenarios a little bit later, but everything's working as intended. We're good to go on the emulator. This is a quick into the filters. If you needed to do some advanced rules, we can play with those as well. So moving over to the simulator. It's a little different here. Now we don't have to do some of the initial steps in the settings because iOS is different, is that it understands a proxy and you don't have to tell all of that. There are a few little nuances in the end, but some of those initial setups we don't have to do as much on here. So if I go to my example domain, you can see already it's capturing the HTTP traffic where before I had to take some extra steps. But now let's try that HTTPS, right? That's where a majority of our sites these days are using the secure traffic. So when I go to Hashnode, it says it can't open it, right? Because it hasn't secured that connection. So that's one thing I need to do, is I need to make sure that handshake with the server is being recognized, because right now it's not. So I need a workaround, but it's nothing to fear. We can definitely work around this. So I'm going into my certificate settings. Now I can go back here and I can export the Fiddler root certificate in binary format, which is pretty amazing. I think you guys are going to be impressed with this part here. So when I go ahead and I export that, it puts it into a folder right on my desktop. And watch this, I can drag and drop it right onto my simulator. Then I go back, I confirm it's there, toggle on and off just so it gives it that prompt to give that explanation. Now let's go back to the HTTPS site. And there. So those were the steps that you can take to start capturing that mobile traffic. And we did the side-by-side. I don't know if most of you would have the use case where you have to use the iOS and the Android, but just to show you how you use that right in conjunction with Fiddler Everywhere. I think that's pretty exciting. That's the newer part of the talk that we're doing today. So now let's get into like some more common scenarios. Like what are those things for more on everyday usage that you may need? So here's a big one, right? App verification. This is one that comes up a lot. You need to test the quality of your app, right? You think you're close to release, but there's some steps you need to take before you shut this out the door. Some of these aren't easy to simulate. That's why I'm going to use Fiddler Everywhere in this scenario. So if any failing requests. So this is one I think is really important, that I feel like it's more like a free throw. You know, a basketball game. It's something that you should never happen, but yet you need to take the steps to make sure. So what I'm going to do here is when your app silently fails, right? We get to resolve these issues before the customer spots them. So in this scenario, I'm going back to my Hashnode website, like we talked about. And what I want to do is I'm clicking around, I'm generating some traffic. So this is me having Fiddler running in the back end, and I'm going ahead and capturing all of these sessions, which we'll see in my live session list once I go back into the application. Again, you can use any site you want. Hashnode is just a good one for my demo. So you can see all of those sessions that I've captured while on that site. Now what I want to do is I want to look for those 400, right? And 401s. Or in this case, I think I'm going to do 400 and 500s. And I'm going to hit filter. So it took me 10 seconds. I clicked at all that traffic, and I didn't have to manually go through them one by one. I was able to use that filter, look for those 400, 500 errors that could silently kill my app, and make sure that they're not there so I can move on to the next thing. So get that out of the way, and you're good to go. The next thing I want to do is simulate expired access tokens. So this is something people may be familiar with. If you need to update your profile, right, and you need to capture the API, I want to see what happens when the access token expires. And this is what this particular demo is going to do. So I'm going to simulate that. I'm going to simulate an access token expired. So I'm going into my edit, into my profile. I'm going to clear those sessions, right, because I want to start with a clean session list so I don't get bombarded by some of the other things. I'm going to go update. And it looks like my profile was updated successfully. So now I want to go back and I want to create a rule. This is where that rule builder comes in. And what I want to tell this rule is to change that response to a 401. So what I'm going to do is 401 unauthorized access. And the browser's paying attention to that first line, right? So the rest of it is pretty much up to you, but that first line is where you need to make sure you're spot on. And I'm going to say here, access token expired. Real basic. And then I hit save. So that rule is now executed. Now I need to go back to my Hashnode website. I'm going to hit update, and you see I get that error updating in the profile. So I know that I got the right response back, indicating that the app did, that my access token expires, and the app didn't crash, right? I don't know if you've all been in those situations where an access token expires, you go back to the app and the app crashes, and that's a whole nother issue that you need to deal with. Now, in terms of the experience, I don't know if that's the best in terms of the error profiling update, but my main point and my job is to make sure the app didn't crash, which it didn't, and then maybe I can pass this off to my design team or my user experience team to give a more contextual information about the access token expiration. So this is another big one too, in terms of simulating, let me go back one. Simulating a server error, right? As a developer, you're responsible for maintaining stable web applications. And how do you scan for 500 errors that may not be immediately visible? And this is where it comes in great again. We're gonna kind of use that same setup that I did with that rule builder. But what I wanna do is I wanna have it return a different response and see how that's handled. So you see I'm back there with my 401, but this time I'm gonna put the 500 internal server error. So I go back to my HashNode site, I hit update, and you can see I get that error in updating. So I'm gonna go in here, I'm gonna right click, and I'm all set. So it returned that 500 error, I found that real quickly, and I can confirm the error message was displayed, and we can move on to the next thing. So what happens when there's a slow connection, right? These are things outside of our control, but what if we're in a low or no network situation? What are we gonna do? How can we simulate what quirks may appear in our app if we've never tested for this? So what I wanna do in this particular scenario is, again, simulate what that would rule like and create a rule. In this particular one, I want to go to my create story request, and I'm going to the edit button here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit the delay. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set it to 5,000 milliseconds, which is 5 seconds. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit save here, and I wanna go back and refresh the app and see what happens. So this is the way I'm simulating that situation without having to actually crash it or talk to my server. So you can see here I go back and I hit, and it took about the 5 seconds. I think I went past it quickly there, but it took that 5 seconds before it loaded. But everything looks proper, it loaded correctly. There aren't any quirks. It's not going to be a bad user experience or anything that is going to deter someone. So what happens when the CSS file gets delayed? So one of the most impactful things, is your page performance. And like I said, we have a talk after this one that gets into more performance. But is your CSS loaded in the right way that it doesn't delay the page? And that's what we want to find out. So to see how the app looks when the CSS file gets delayed, I'm going to go into Filter Everywhere and find that CSS request, right? Since I'm the QA, I know requests I'm looking for, so I use the filter at the top. And from here, I'm going to right click. And I know what I'm looking for, so I'm going to set, again, that rule, and I'm going to set that delay to 5,000 seconds. Now at this point, I'm starting to create more rules, as you can tell. So I want to start maybe naming some of my rules. So in this particular one, I'm going to go ahead and right click, and it's pretty easy right on the fly to change that to delay. And what's nice, you can start to save your rules, build your rules, even share your rules, and we can get into that another time. So let me go back, open a new instance of my HashNode site. And I'm waiting for that CSS file, right? And nothing looked really quirky, nothing failed, but is that the best user experience, right? Everyone expects kind of an on-demand situation. Better situation here maybe be like a loading indicator, something to let you know what's happening behind the scenes. We don't want people to X out, close out, move on to your app because they're impatient. Now this is another one, and I think you guys will find this interesting. What happens when your CSS file doesn't load at all? Do you know what that situation is? Have you tested for this, or is it kind of a wait and see approach, which isn't what I'm going to recommend? So what I want to do is I want to troubleshoot for when the styling download fails itself. So what I want to do is I want to go into that existing rule that I already have. And what I want to do is I want to change that from a server drop to a non-graceful close, otherwise a drop connection. And let's rename this too. As I said, I'm getting into more of the rules, and I want to be able to separate them and share them with my colleagues. So I'm opening another instance of the HashNode site, and bam, you're hit with those images right off the bat. I think automatically this discounts your credibility, shows maybe you haven't done the right QA testing. Also doesn't offer any contextual direction, right? It's just a bad impression overall. Nothing's been resized. This is something you want to avoid. Expired certificates. So this is something that's new that came out in the recent release, and this is a pretty powerful feature, especially if any of you are familiar or responsible for handling certificates within your organization, you can know it can be quite troublesome. So now, if your certificate becomes invalid, that's a big deal, right? You can no longer process secure transactions. You open yourself up for website attacks, and that's what we want to avoid as well. So with this new feature, and you can see I switched to the horizontal layout there, which is another feature, but I want to go in and I want to generate that traffic again on my Hashnode site. And Hashnode, their site's in pretty good shape. They don't have any expired certificates. They have some that are expiring, and we'll go through those different notifications. But now that I've collected that traffic, I'm going to use the rule builder. And what I want to do here is I want to narrow in on certificate information, and I want to put a range, right? So I want to say I want that are going to expire, and I'm going to pick a date. And in this one, I put September 30th. And I want to be able to give myself some visual indicators. So I'm going to do red and white, and then I can go ahead and execute. So right away, I'm able to find certificates that are going to expire before September 30th and today's date. And then I can click into those specific certificate information to get information about the issuing authority. And I can find the details and when they're expiring and all of those things right at the top, with a few clicks. So that is something really exciting that we've added that saves you time. And if someone expects you, or yourself, but you expect to be on top of those things because the repercussions are high if you're not. So reporting a bug with logs. So this gets a little bit more into the collaboration part of Fiddler Everywhere. So as a developer, like we've talked about, let's say you work on a distributed team, right? And you have QA, you have support team, but you need to collaborate. There's typically someone who is expecting high efficiency, other outputs, beyond the debugging. So what I want to do here is I want to collaborate on solving an issue that a customer reported. So in this particular scenario, what I'm going to do is I'm trying to update my name on my Hashnode profile. When I hit update, it looks like it is updated successfully, but as a good QA, I'm going to go back and test it one more time. Is this correct? And then, so I have Fiddler going ahead and capturing it. So I have that in the background, and let's go ahead and try that one more time. But we can see that it reverts back. So what I need to do now is I need to inspect all those sessions, and I want to share this with my team. So I'm going to select all of those sessions, and you can see here I can go ahead and put in their email address, and I can even add context as a note. So this is really powerful. Instead of having to ask someone to walk through these steps or reproduce the issue, which we all know what happens, doesn't happen on my machine, you're able to share the sessions you saw or that you experienced, give them information about it, and allow them to take those next steps, all without changing the context. This is all within Fiddler. And what's nice is once you send this off, and I'm just using an alias here, they will get notification within their Fiddler settings, and those sessions will appear on the left-hand side. So in this instance, I just put, hey, profile is not working, I hit save, and we're good to go. So I was able to do that real quickly, saving you time and headaches, right? So what about when you need to test the fix? So this is where we're going to get more into the code editor, a little bit more exciting for some of you. But you want to simplify the fix, right, in a running environment. So what I want to do here is this, we're going back to that same updating the profile. And I see in here that I have the name, but what I want to do is I want to create another rule. So here I'm in the Visual Studio code editor, I go back into my Fiddler Everywhere, I'm clearing that traffic. What I want to do is go ahead and update that profile again. And what I want to do this time is also, I want to simulate deployment. So what I want is to tell Fiddler, when someone asks for this file, which I already know the file name because I am part of that team, I want it to return a local copy of the file instead of the one on the server. So I have that file, put it in there, I hit save, and make sure I can the left and right, you can turn your rules on and off. So I turn another rule off that I needed, and I can go back here. And good. So now I'm able to do that, and I was able to ready and push this fix live, which is a nice feeling. So those are some of the common scenarios we walk. I mean, there's hundreds of more. Like I said, you can make what you want of it, whether you need to mock server responses, you need to emulate server drops or slow connections or CSS failures. Those are all at your fingertips and available through the rules, which is very powerful. Now it comes to the results, right? Everyone, okay, that sounds good. I can see myself using this. Didn't know there was an alternative method, but what are those results that I can expect to achieve? What am I going to tell my boss or someone who I need to report up to of how this tool is going to help my situation and the overall arching company results? So shipping better software, I think that's a big one for all of us. I mean, we want to ship better high quality solutions, code, projects. We all have deadlines. We all have requirements, and that's tough to do. Save time for what matters most. Like I started off at the beginning of the talk, debugging is likely not your passion. There may be a few of you out there, so I don't want to offend anyone, but there are other things that you want to do, and debugging is just part of your tasks. And this is where we want to step in and make that easier for you. It shouldn't be tedious, and that's what we're trying to bring about in terms of the awareness that there are alternative ways, and it can easily integrate it into your workflow without any compromises. And that's, I think, another misconception too, is that people feel if they use some type of tooling or web debugging proxy that they're compromising elsewhere, but that isn't the case. Have happy customers, right? I mean, I think we're all talking about that. Even in Billy's talk today, he talked about, our jobs aren't just coding, right? You're not just designing code. You need to build solutions and applications that customers love and end users enjoy. And boost your team's productivity. I mean, we're all tasked with doing more with less. So what's a way that we can do that without increasing our bandwidth or our workload is by working smarter and integrating systems in where we can. And like we talked about some of those bonus scenarios with that built-in collaboration. I think that's pretty exciting. Now, we worked on this checklist, and Rosen helped me with this a little while back. But this is another thing that we run into is people don't know where to get started. It seems daunting. Okay, so I like what you're saying. I see how this tool could work. Where do I start? It could be overwhelming. And this is where we kind of just walk you through things in terms of checking those requests, right? Checking response content, checking response times, and some best practices. So this is a check sheet that just really helps you get started. And you can hear people go share testaments that something that maybe took them a couple days before to solve, without Fiddler, without a tool, by following this checklist and using that tool, you can do it in hours. And that's real life testimonial. So I think that's pretty impressive and speaks to itself. And then there's some optional resources too. So this is available on our website. I definitely recommend that you check it out. It's pretty easy to follow along with, but yet it puts you in a good position. And these are some of those learning resources. And I know I've mentioned Robert a couple times, but he is a big fan of Fiddler and has a lot of real world knowledge and is using it in his day-to-day job, and just happens to like it so much that he shares it with the rest of the world. But we have some real interesting and imaginative resources for you to do. So like this first video, right? You're gonna learn how to trace with Fiddler. That's something I haven't really talked about, but the vernacular sometimes varies amongst us. But you can trace how to get more from the filters, right? How do you emulate those different browsers using the rules? How do you work with a heat map, right? I mean, there's so much we could go into, a lot more. The second video here, he talks about how you can troubleshoot a machine that doesn't have the required software installed. He can demonstrate how you can configure the client device to point to Fiddler Everywhere. And one thing he always mentions too that he likes about Fiddler Everywhere is that you don't have to install something on someone's machine, right? No one wants to be that person. If you're like, hey, do you remember when you saw that on my machine? Now my printer doesn't work, like a month later. There's not connection, but you're always blamed with that. And in the third video, it's how to improve the overall performance of your site, right? I mean, there are so many performance techniques and tools and metrics that we need to be familiar with. And so how do you work with those? What ones are important? Which ones do you not need to care about as much? And how do you can tell if a site's using them? How do you know if a site you're using is trusted? Or what if you have a vendor who is causing issues on your site. So this is how you can use Fiddler Everywhere to help you with that. So this is how to get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you. Part of my job is the awareness, education, but I'm also interested in user feedback, as well as ways that Fiddler can help to make your job easier. A lot of the release items that we have that are coming up, everyone's been hearing about the release tomorrow for the big products on the Telerik and Kendo UI side, have come from people like you who have shared with us in our forums and our blogs about things they want. So a couple things that you can expect to see tomorrow in the news, that we have webinars going all through the week, but extended offline support, right? So now you're not going to be forcefully logged out. You can continue to use the services that don't require that cloud connection. Apple Silicon build, right? For you Mac users out there, I'm trying to see how many Mac machines I have, but now with the M series chip, you have options. You can get better performance and have more flexibility with that. Some of the other things are more certificate information, and I got a little bit into it when I did the mobile app, but when I was in the settings, it showed how you could skip domains, and sometimes that's useful when you're capturing mobile traffic and you need to, for example, skip the Apple Store or something along those lines that have additional barriers to them. And then another part is where am I going to be next? So like I said, I've traveling around for a little bit. My next event is in Eastern PA, so I don't know where everyone's from, but it's in the Poconos, which will be my first time, but there's a tech bash. And this is an event put on by Jeff Blankenberg, and I'd like to see a lot of you there.